the progeny of John Gladstone for their apology. Acknowledgement and apology are first steps in the process of reparative justice. The apology is implicitly an acknowledgement of the cruel nature of African enslavement and indentureship in Guyana, an act of contrition that paves the way for justice. An acknowledgement and apology serve as a moral reckoning, validating the pain and suffering inflicted on generations past. However, the multifaceted legacy of slavery extends far beyond the confines of historical memory. The descendants of John Gladstone must now also outline their plan of action in line with the CARICOM 10 points plan for reparative justice for slavery and indentureship. I therefore propose that the intended apology include issues of compensation, reparative justice, and those involved to be posthumously charged for crimes against humanity.
Hello, brothers and sisters. I hope you're all doing fine. Now, if you're brave enough, you know that reparations are not a favor from the US government or from the European nations, that reparations are the rightful compensation for the lives that were lost, for the energy of the black people who were enslaved for the longest time to work in the fields of the white people, to make sure that the economy of the US is whatever it is today. So let's watch this video of the Guyanese president Mohammed Irfaan, who comes out to criticize Donald Trump and the whole Western countries for failing to compensate and pay reparations to black people. Then have a very quick discussion. Thank you so much.
I welcome the progeny of John Gladstone for their apology. Acknowledgement and apology are first steps in the process of reparative justice. The apology is implicitly an acknowledgement of the cruel nature of African enslavement and indentureship in Guyana, an act of contrition that paves the way for justice. The apology offered by the descendants of John Gladstone underscores their willingness to confront their family's dark past and to acknowledge the immense pain, suffering, and indignities inflicted upon innocent persons through their families' actions. As I said in my message this year for Emancipation Day, I called on those who are complicit and who profited from the trade in captive Africans and African enslavement to offer just reparations. The Gladstone family has admitted that it benefited from African enslavement and indentureship on the Demerara and other plantations owned by its patriarch John Gladstone. It has agreed to undertake certain actions. I therefore propose that the intended apology include issues of compensation, reparative justice, and those involved to be posthumously charged for crimes against humanity. John Gladstone history, as you know, records that John Gladstone was an absentee owner of plantations in Jamaican Guyana, including on his wealth earned from mercantile trade in India, the United States, and the West Indies. After the British seizure of the colonies that became Guyana in 1803, John Gladstone began to invest in them. His interests and acquisitions included, at one time or the other, plantations at Belmont, Covenden, Hampton Court, Industry, Mettenmeersburg, Success, Vredenhoop, Vredenstein, and Wales. John Gladstone was chairman of the Liverpool West Indian Association, one of the most important groups defending the interests of West Indian plantation owners. Throughout his life, he was a champion of the institution of slavery. To protect his commercial interests, he successfully lobbied Foreign Secretary Canning not to return the colonies of Demerara, Essequibo, and Berbice to the Netherlands. When the 1823 Demerara slave revolt erupted on his plantation at Success, he was deeply confused, blaming Reverend John Smith and the other missionaries. But this tragedy did not deter him from expanding his investment in Guyana. His official policy was one of amelioration, that slaves' conditions should be gradually improved and Christianization prioritized, a position that was in staunch opposition to the abolitionists. At the time of abolition, he received compensation, which at today's value is estimated at more than 10 million pounds. The freed Africans received nothing. Anticipating a collapse in African field labor after the end of the apprenticeship period, Gladstone, along with other planters, helped to pioneer the use of Indian indentured labor in British Guyana, introducing a new form of servitude to the colony. On the 23rd of March 1837, he wrote to the colonial secretary, Lord Grey, arguing that unless a system of regular and continuous labor is adopted, the cultivation of the sugarcane cannot be carried on to a productive level. In the same year, an act was passed which allowed Gladstone to import Indian indentured immigrants. Serious abuse of Indian indentured immigrants on Gladstone's Freedom Hoop plantation was uncovered soon after by a member of the Anti-Slavery Society. Despite his outsized influence in British Guyana and the empire as a whole, Gladstone never once visited the West Indies. He was an absentee plantation owner. In recent years, the demands for reparations for African enslavement and indentureship have intensified. The call for reparations is not intended to promote or leverage shame or guilt over the slave trade and slavery. It is not extortion. Instead, the demand for reparations is a commitment to righting historical wrongs. The transatlantic slave trade and African enslavement were an affront to humanity itself. The Durban Declaration of 2001 of the World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance acknowledged that slavery and the slave trade are a crime against humanity and should always have been so. Millions of Africans endured unspeakable horrors, displacement, captivity, extreme and brutal physical and sexual violence, and a severing of family ties. They were treated as chattel, their labor exacted under the harshest conditions. They dehumanized slaves by taking away their culture, religion, and even their names. The heinousness of this crime against humanity demands that we seek to right these wrongs. Yet, we face a pushback when it comes to recompense for this crime, something that does not accord with the fundamental underpinnings of justice. But there is another important reason why the Caribbean is demanding reparations. Slavery has bequeathed a legacy that endures to this day. It must be recalled that 2 out of every 5 slave persons were shipped to the Caribbean. The region bears witness to the lasting impact of this historical injustice, a burden that has impeded development and hindered progress. Colonialism, including slavery, has bequeathed economic structures characterized by a high dependency on a few crops and sectors. The focus of the colonial economies was one on the production of these cash crops for export to Europe. The labor-intensive nature of plantation agriculture meant that the vast majority of people were engaged in agricultural work. The legacy of a predominantly agrarian economy based on plantation agriculture has had lasting impact, as lack of sufficient diversification has made the region's economies more vulnerable to external shocks and highly dependent on external markets. Sociologists have argued that the high levels of interpersonal, institutional, and societal violence which were being experienced in the Caribbean are a legacy of colonialism. During the colonial era, persons were subjected to extreme physical violence and brutality. Violence was also used as a tool of control and perpetuated an environment of fear. The call for reparations is an essential response to right a historical wrong and mitigate the enduring legacy of slavery. Reparations are aimed at ensuring a reckoning for the greatest crime against humanity and addressing the multifaceted inheritance of slavery. The Caribbean Reparations Committee 10-point plan for reparations offers a roadmap towards dismantling the barriers that persist. It calls inter alia for an unconditional apology, an investment in education, healthcare, infrastructure, and cultural revitalization, an investment not only in the present but also in the future, ensuring future generations are unshackled from the chains of history. While acknowledging the historical atrocities of slavery and offering an apology is undeniably significant, it constitutes just the initial step on the path towards achieving comprehensive reparative justice for African enslavement. An acknowledgement and apology serve as a moral reckoning, validating the pain and suffering inflicted on generations past. However, the multifaceted legacy of slavery extends far beyond the confines of historical memory. The descendants of John Gladstone must now also outline their plan of action in line with the CARICOM 10 points plan for reparative justice for slavery and indentureship.
Interesting here because reparations is not a culture war issue. Reparations is an issue of economic justice. It's an issue of human beings and resources and wealth was stolen in a way that is inextricably linked to the kinds of inequalities that we see today. And there is a moral and economic and political case to be made that that wealth needs to be returned. The value of the wealth that was stolen needs to be returned. Obviously, there's a part of the slave trade that can never be compensated for, and that is the theft of human bodies and the torturing of human bodies that essentially built this country. But we can talk numbers, and numbers have been thrown around. It's obviously in the trillions because not only was huge amounts of money and natural resources stolen then, they continue to be stolen now in the form of illegitimate global debt. So that is actually a very hard economic issue. And yet I think it's very interesting that it's essentially being converted and metabolized as a culture war issue by a jumped up celebrity talk show host who has no business being involved in what should be the hard-hitting political journalism of interviewing an elected president from Guyana, a country that, again, whose human beings and natural resources fuel the development of this country, about what we do with the ongoing injustice. But I think the reason that a Richard Madeley gets so offended, personally offended by this to the point where he's banging on the table, not like a school teacher, but actually like a school child, is because it goes to the very heart of the myth that Britain tells about itself, that, in fact, most countries of the West tell about themselves, which is that they, through, entrepreneurial, resourcefulness and through pure intelligence, stole a march on the rest of the world. What they don't want to believe is that the development of this country and the ongoing existence of this country as a wealthy and so-called developed nation is inextricably and inseparably linked from the violence and dispossession that this country forced so much of the world's population into. And they cannot square that with the image that they have of Britain as this country that stands alone, that pulls itself up by its bootstraps, and that just inherently deserves its status. And that's why there is this inherent racism in this entire conversation, because it's ultimately this belief that countries that are predominantly white people are full of smarter and better people who naturally deserve the wealth that they have, rather than that was something that they stole from the rest of the world, and that the rest of the world is entitled to take that wealth back. So I'm not surprised that he is so emotional. I just don't think that if our broadcast media took seriously the politics of
the finances involved here in terms of reparations for slavery, it's about the gestures. And you think that the British royal family should make a big gesture, don't you? What do you mean? Hand over a palace to your country?
Well, no, we don't want the British to hand over a palace that we built. You know, if you go into many of the palaces in Britain, you will see the lovely green heartwood from Guyana. You will see the sweat, tears, and blood of the slaves who were exploited.
So what do you want?
And the revenue that was earned from their exploitation. So we're not asking for a palace. We're asking for justice, and a fair form of justice to the ancestors and to the greatest injustice that has ever been done to human beings.
We look forward to
We're not asking for palaces. You can enjoy the palace, and when we visit you, we'll also enjoy it.
People will be wondering what, you explain that there are calculations, but are you able to say in what measure that would be? I mean, are we talking billions, millions? What would you expect the payout to be, and over what period of time?
Well, you know, this year in Guyana, we commemorate the 200th anniversary of the Demerara Rebellion. And it took 200 years to get an apology from one of the families. I don't believe that you would want us to wait 200 years for reparative justice and for us to take this conversation forward. CARICOM would have set out a 10-point plan on what should constitute reparative justice and what should constitute reparation. And the calculation goes into billions for the region.
Now, brothers and sisters, many people have been mistaking reparations for maybe some grants or some offer to black people. Now, it is very bad to see this. It is the slavery that black people went through to see the economy of the US and that of the European countries that makes them ask for reparations. Reparations is not a grant. It is not help. It is a right for black people. Black people worked so much hard to make the US the way it is today, to make the European nations the way they are today. And when black people are asking for reparations, they are not asking for a favor. They are asking for their right. And I wonder how difficult this is. This is because the government of the US had never considered at any point to pay reparations. Now, I'll get you back to time when the Guyanese Prime Minister is talking about reparations for black people. Now, it is not something very new to all of you who are watching this video. It's something that we've been asking, and black people in the diaspora have been asking for the longest time, that pay us reparations and we will live here. And when our leaders are now talking about reparations for black people and reparations for the black community, it doesn't matter that it doesn't mean that they are asking for a favor from Donald Trump or the US government or from the European governments. It only means that black people should be given what is very rightful to them, that they worked hard in slavery without being paid, in harsh conditions. Their grandfathers, their parents lost their lives. You all remember Jim Crow and all this other stuff. And you ask yourself, Kamala Harris has been there, or Barack Obama has been there. Why didn't they push for these reparations? Or when you get there and you get super rich, you do not think of your brothers and sisters. And this is where we do really have a problem with black people or black folks getting in power and they can't think of their brothers or their fellows. Now, you all remember Martin Luther King saying, the enemy of a black person in the diaspora is a black person. that the black people in the diaspora are fighting each other. That you get someone in power who is a black person, but they go talk for themselves and they never speak about you. I'm very much glad and proud of the Guyanese Prime Minister talking about the reparations. Now, Mohammed Irfaan has been talking about this for the longest time, and he once even said, now the president of Guyana one day even said that the presidents of and the government of the US should shut up and make sure that without talking too much, they get the black people reparations. You know, many black people in the diaspora are suffering, really suffering, not because their parents were lazy. No, not because their parents could not work hard to have some savings for them to inherit. No, it is because their grandfathers were working so much hard, but for free. They were enslaved for the longest time. It is 300 years and we are still talking about the same thing. Pay reparations. Pay reparations. Reparate and make sure that the black people who have been affected by slavery for the longest time get their rightful share of this economy that is doing well globally. That make sure the black people who worked hard to make sure that you enjoy this democracy today, you enjoy this development, that you enjoy this economy today, are reparated. They get their rightful share in the US. And this is the most difficult thing that the government has been trying to snub. They do not want to talk about this because they know the black people are not asking for a favor. The black people are not asking for something that cannot be done. Of course, it can be done. How much more? How many is being lost in corruption? A lot of funds are being lost through corruption. All these regimes have been stealing, and instead they can just close a loophole and make sure that black people are being reparated. How many times will black people go on the streets? How many times will black people hold forums and movements to talk about their reparations? How many leaders must speak for the US government to hear that it is necessary and it is a must for black people to be reparated? They are not asking for grants. No, hell no. They are not asking for a favor from you. Hell no. They are asking for their right. That our parents were enslaved here. They worked so hard that others lost their lives while working for you. In your factories, in the fields where you actually harassed them. You actually brutalized everything. So it is with utmost respect, if you are going to pay us reparations, that our parents didn't die poor because they wanted to be poor. It's because you forced them to be there. It's because you forced them to work in your fields. And there is much more need for us to be talking about these topics, because I feel like there is no actual pressure that these people have been receiving, and there is so much that should be talked about, and for them to understand that we are not happy for our brothers' sufferings. We are not happy for them not reparating our brothers. That this is the time our brothers should receive their rightful share of that economy. Instead, they have gone ahead and they are now using the systems to fight black folks. We now see oppressions everywhere. We see a systematic racism that has been spread from generation to generation. We've seen how many black people lose their jobs, and some others who cannot get jobs. Those who live from hand to mouth. Those who can't afford their mortgages. Those who can't afford to have a good or decent living. But just because some people had to gain a lot of wealth at the expense of the suffering of black people. So when we say that black people should be reparated, they should be compensated. It is not, we are not asking for a favor. We are asking for whatever is very rightful. If you have a worker in your farm, or if you get to hire a worker to work for you in your factory or to work for you in your company, you are paying them, right? What is so hard to pay someone who you are holding a very big debt? Someone you didn't pay back in the years. What's so hard? If at all they want to talk about democracy, they want to talk about human rights, they want to talk about equality, they should be reminded they have to pay reparations for them to come and talk to us on how democracy and equality should work out for all people in the world. That black folks are suffering at the expense of their ignorance. So we are saying that if they are not going to pay for reparations, they should never talk about equality. They should not talk about democracy and all this human rights stuff. We are here asking for reparations because black people deserve to be reparated. They deserve to be compensated for their energy and for the lives that were lost to make the US a superpower, to make European nations first world countries. So it is not something that we are asking out of favor. No, we are asking because it is our right, and it is the right of the black diasporans who are suffering. Thank you so much for having taken your time to watch this video. I appreciate so much, brothers and sisters. If it's your first time on this channel, please consider subscribing, commenting, liking, and sharing this video. Thank you so much.